Hey there, this is Cameron, and I'm doing a little response to Richard. Richard, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. I'm assuming it's either Mabe or Mabe, but you can correct me. I'd like to start by saying that, in essence, and in terms of the substance of what you're saying, I completely agree with everything you're saying. There's a few points of knowledge or information that I think can be fine-tuned based on my own understanding and my perspective. And what I first want to clarify is that when we're talking about, are you born with knowledge? Let me clarify what I mean, because when I said that you're not born with knowledge, we have to understand that there's three aspects to a human being. Firstly, there's the being themselves, that's the who you are. And then there's your physical body, and then there's your mind. And those are three separate things, and yet all three together forms what we call a human being. The being is that aspect that I would say is prior to being born. It's the life force. It's the who you are, which is basically completely undefined. It's sort of like a seed or a kernel. The physical body is obviously the physical body. And then your mind only really develops later as you learn and experience life and make decisions and choices and accept certain beliefs and certain knowledge and information. I agree with you that we are born, that when we're born and we have a body, obviously our body is constructed according to our genetic code, which is our DNA. And that is in itself a form of knowledge. It's a structure of knowledge. And according to the DNA, as you were pointing out, you'll have certain abilities, certain talents, certain propensities, certain things that you would be more effective at if you do them. Like the example you gave is, Stephen Hawking's not being able to be a carpenter. He probably wouldn't be a pro athlete. Certain people are born with more athletic ability than other people. Certain people are born with more natural mathematical ability to a certain degree. But what I would like you to consider is that regardless of all of those propensities, which as you pointed, I would call those aptitudes, by the way. What you pointed out was it's like they're kind of covered up based on belief systems that we install in children. And as children, then we don't learn how to fully express those or actually find a path that would allow us to utilize our aptitudes fully. And so the reason why I challenged the point you were saying about whether we're born with knowledge is because sometimes, and I don't think that you're doing this, but sometimes that is used as an excuse that all we have to do is just unlearn all the belief systems that we've been taught. But that is a danger, and again, not that you're necessarily saying that, but I can see other people utilizing that knowledge because they might see you as a person of authority or someone who knows something, and they would not necessarily look at the context of what you're saying, because on one post, in one comment, there's not a lot of context there. Of course, if they follow you and listen to you, that would be different. So a lot of times what I do when I make comments is I just challenge certain points to get a conversation going so that more context can be provided. And sometimes people just react, which you didn't, which was cool. But in terms of the point of whether you're born with knowledge, if we use it as an excuse, like we just have to unlearn everything we're doing, well, the fact is, whether you're born with certain propensities or not, certain aptitudes, you still have to learn how to utilize them. And the way in which we learn in this world, the way we interact with each other, the way we, literally every aspect of our lives is based on the words that we learn. That's what separates us from animals. It's actually what, from the time you're 0 to 7 years old, you are basically absorbing everything in your environment, and that would include words. You're observing behavior patterns from the adults around you. You're absorbing the words that they're saying. You're absorbing the definitions of those words according to how you see the adults acting, not so much what they actually say the words mean. more so either as an acceptance of a behavior pattern around a certain word or a rejection of it, and therefore a reaction and doing the opposite. Like you might have very strict parents and then you might have a rebellious child, or you might have strict parents and a very docile child. But rarely in those situations where a parent is coming from a perspective of not really fully directing the situation and giving clarity on every single word that the child learns, very rarely, if at all, would you have a child who develops the ability to direct themselves in every moment based on common sense, stopping emotional reactions, breathing, considering common sense based on what's best for everybody in the context of the actions or the things that they're doing, including themselves. You don't really see that happening. So what ends up happening is, because a parent does not install an effective vocabulary, an effective reasoning ability based on an effective vocabulary, and by effective vocabulary I mean every single word that exists having a proper definition and having direct access to that, not having to think about it, what we would call unconscious competence. Because you can't really slow down and think about every word when you're trying to do something. Like right now, if I was thinking about what word should I say next, I would not be able to communicate. This has to be an automated behavior, just like our breathing. If we had to think about every breath, we would die. Because the moment you got distracted, I mean, think of as a man, a woman walks down the street in a short skirt, you're not thinking about breathing, and then you're dead, or your heartbeat. So there are lots of systems that are pre-installed in our bodies as human beings, fortunately. So imagine if as a baby, you had to learn how to breathe. You would not survive past the moment of birth. So fortunately, there's things that are pre-installed, and whoever designed this reality made sure that that was installed from birth, because otherwise it'd be like if you sold a car without an engine. Like the person had to put the engine themselves. Nobody would drive cars and they wouldn't buy your product. So there are certain points of knowledge, structures of knowledge that are pre-installed. However, if you buy a car, there's certain knowledge. There's a car right there. There's certain knowledge that exists in that car as a structure, an engine, pedals, etc. Accelerator, brakes, gears, all the physical components of a car. But if you may have the best car on the planet, but if you don't know how to drive it, because you don't understand all the words involved, like how to brake, how to turn the steering wheel, how to look left and right, how to use your blinkers, how to use the wipers, if you don't have the vocabulary of understanding how to utilize that machine, the car being like your physical body, the being themselves, you being the driver of the car, if you don't have the vocabulary of how to drive that car, you can't do it. And so, think about when you first learn to drive a car, it's very challenging. And if you have a terrible instructor, you might develop a behavior pattern or emotional pattern around driving where you're always stressed, or you're always flipping people off, or you're always, rushing, or you're like a terrible driver, you never look. And that's what's occurring as parents when we're raising children in this world, because as parents, we don't know how to drive the car. We were not educated. And that's what I meant in terms of my comment of we're learning the sins of the fathers, because we're just repeating the things that we were taught unconsciously. So in other words, as parents, there's very little that a parent teaches their child from a conscious, direct perspective. They're just unconsciously downloading information about who they are and their beliefs and their behavior patterns into their child. And the child is just accepting. And they'll accept or not accept things primarily based on how it makes them feel, because the parent doesn't have the tools of vocabulary and thought to explain to the child, and the child doesn't have the vocabulary at this point to understand what an emotion is, what a feeling is, and that if we make decisions purely based on emotion, it can lead us into areas where we limit ourselves or we get into trouble because we're just trying to avoid or gain a certain feeling rather than a certain outcome. And if you look around at the world, we have so many problems. Suffering, starvation, poverty, rape, murder, war, mental illness, abuse, all kinds of things that stem from a person's inability to get what they want out of life in a way that doesn't harm other people. And so I made a comment this morning on my Facebook, a post about, isn't it interesting that the people with the most heart, or who follow their hearts, end up getting screwed over by the system? Because let's be honest, what does it take to make money in this world? A beautiful smile and telling the person what makes them feel good? and taking their money. And you can't really care so much about whether you actually benefit that person. Now, I personally do care if I benefit another person when I sell them something. But that makes it double hard to make money in this world when you're coming from a point of integrity. For example, what you do, which I'm not actually familiar at all what you do when you go to people's homes and all these things you're talking about. So I'm very interested in to learn more about that. Especially because of the things you said in the video. I'm like, wow, this person gets it, okay? But you might find it very difficult to charge money for what you do because you have to really sell a person on the fact that there's a possibility of changing when they're looking around at the world and they're looking at the memories within themselves and saying, I can't change. And if I do, that makes it unstable for me to survive in this world, almost impossible. And really that's why parents teach their children certain things. Again, it's not really teaching, it's just an unconscious direct download in essence. Why do I say it's a download? Because they've done studies where they found children who were found in the woods, who from the time they were like 18 months old till like 9 years old or something like that, they were raised by wolves. Like they were lost in the woods and wolves raised them. And like the children crawl on all fours and eat raw meat and like bark and howl at the moon and stuff. So they're like not humans. They're like basically wolves. And once they're past that first 7 years, because the ability to learn and remove beliefs and programs and install new ones, after 7 years, you're basically lost that ability to do that, which you were doing naturally up until 7 years of age, that direct downloading from your environment. Once you lose that ability, it's very difficult to learn anything new. And so they found that it's next to impossible to even teach these children language at that point, because it's like the structure of their brain has basically crystallized, solidified, and they can't learn new things. So that may be something you notice, that when you're speaking to people who are listening, where you're sharing your message of what's possible, is that they'll put up barriers and defenses. And those barriers and defenses are actually their minds. The mind is a defense mechanism. I think of it like a force field around your body. And you can see it with Kirlian photography. That's your mind. It's an energy projection. It's like a force field. And the whole purpose of the mind is to protect you and help you survive in this world. Because what's the starting point of this world? The starting point of this world is survival. Survival of the fittest. And depending on the environment we grow up in, that determines what we perceive survival to mean. And you automatically learn how to survive. So some people develop a really pleasing personality. Some people develop sort of an aggressive personality. They become gang leaders. Some people develop like the desire to always please everybody because that's the way they get what they need. But that's very limiting. And it's in fact the people who generally in society who are the most sociopathic and yet are able to do it in a legal way that make the most money in this world. The people who are sociopaths and do it illegally are basically criminals. And the ones that get caught are the ones who have a low enough vocabulary that they make mistakes because they don't consider everything. You think about what a gang leader, like the head of the mafia, he has to be able to direct people, communicate, talk to the accountants, the lawyers, the whatever. He has to be able to communicate with all these people. Same thing what a CEO does. It's exactly the same. The difference is in the CEO is doing it in a, quote, legal way. And you made a point earlier about, which I thought was really cool. You're like, we're learning how to teach more, how we're learning what is more effective information to teach our children. Like you said, we are teaching them that slavery is wrong. But actually we're not. I mean, yes, I agree. We're learning as humans to a certain degree, but the results are not really showing up because, yes, slavery is wrong, but the context in which we teach it is slavery equals, and this is not necessarily something that's explicitly stated, but when you look at the way it plays out in reality, you'll see what I'm saying, which is the way this whole story around slavery is presented in public schools in America is that slavery equals white people enslaving black people. And yet there's an entire history of slavery that is black people enslaving blacks, blacks enslaving whites, people of all different shades and colors and religions enslaving people of other, even their same color and religion and different colors and religions. Look at the Egyptians, and they had slaves. So we can say, oh, but we've ended slavery. There's still a lot of countries that practice slavery, even sort of on the down low, if you will. But also, when you go to a job that you don't want to do because you have to make money to survive, That's the same thing as slavery. It's just that you get rewarded with money, which you exchange for the survival. But there's people in this world who don't have to do that. They own oil companies. They own, they inherit, or they are part of royal families where they never have to work. And yet they still have to do things to maintain that position. So they're actually still enslaved themselves. It's just that they're like the slaves who have private jets, right? But the thing is, if they stop being the royal prince of whatever, then they'll be totally ostracized, or they'll lose their position. So the reason I was bringing that up is because even in that point, when you say, oh, we're learning how to effectively educate children, although I agree to a certain extent, we're still missing the point, which is that our education system is designed to give children a story about how reality works in a way that, even in very subtle ways, disempowers them from ever taking responsibility for their lives at any real level. And you can go through and look at the education system and see that yourself. But the real basic point that I wanted to address was the point of knowledge and information. I agree with you. We're born with knowledge from the perspective that our bodies are structured in a certain way, DNA, certain aptitudes, etc. But again, that's like buying a beautiful, perfectly running car, but not knowing how to drive it. The moment a child is born, and actually they know it's even before, while they're in the womb, they're learning words, and they're learning the resonance of words, and that vocabulary that a child is developing will determine how they utilize this body, and it will also determine what their mind is. It'll determine what they think about, how they think, how they feel, how they interact with things, how they communicate. Their vocabulary will determine every single thing about their life. So, if that mind is not developed effectively from the time a child is 0 to 7 years old, in other words, if their vocabulary is not developed effectively, then the mind, which is a system of automatic thought, a system of automatic belief, a system of automatic opinion, a system of automatic comparison, a system of automatic judgment, a system of automatic reaction. It's a machine. It's like an artificial intelligence, if you will, that you're designing within yourself from the time you're 0 to 7, based on the examples you see, what you see as possible, and the TV programs you're watching, potentially the books that you're reading, if you're even reading books. Most children these days are not. Most adults these days are not reading books. You're piece by piece designing this little artificial intelligence inside of you. And then at a certain age, it's different for every person, but it's around 7 years, sometimes later, sometimes earlier, that system turns on and it activates, and then it starts speaking to you. And this is why in the law of attraction circles they say your thoughts are not your own. And this is why I'm saying in my posts and asking questions to see who's understanding and who's not, when I say you don't know where your thoughts come from. Because we can say, well, they're not our own. But then where do they come from? What they're coming from, our vocabulary. It's our vocabulary speaking to us according to the starting point of how we've designed it. If we have designed it from the starting point of, I just want to survive, then our vocabulary will speak to us unconsciously, subconsciously through feelings and emotions, and consciously through actual verbal thoughts in our head. And it'll control how we speak. It'll control our body language. It'll control everything about us. It'll put us into situations. It'll help us avoid situations that might challenge certain beliefs and things like that. That might make it less effective for us to survive. In other words, the system is like sort of a sentry. And if you look up the word sentry, it's like a guard who would guard like a castle. Your mind is a sentry. It's a guard. It's a defense mechanism designed according to all the words that you've learned and accepted unknowingly, innocently, based on how your parents have directed you, what you've accepted from that, based on the environment itself. You develop this artificial intelligence called a mind, and then it activates and it starts speaking to you, and then it basically becomes more powerful than you. Because most people cannot change their minds. They think they're changing their minds, but if you look at the research, it shows when they hook people up to, whatever devices measure electrical activity in the brain, EEGs, etc., functional MRIs, all that stuff. They can measure when you have a thought, meaning when the thought is generated electrically in your body, Because as we know, thoughts are just vibrations, if you will, at a much higher level. It's your neurons and your cells vibrating at a very high level, producing this sound, but in a dimension that you can't hear with your ears. You have this natural ability to hear it inside of you and no one else can. And when these thoughts are generated, you then experience them, but you think that you're generating them. You're not. When they put people up in these studies, they find that when the person experiences the thought versus when the thought occurs, there's a delay. You're experiencing after the fact. It's like when you're looking at your computer screen, the monitor, when the computer's on, you're not looking at the program in the computer running in real time. Sorry, I'm getting a text there. You're looking at, when you're looking at your computer screen, you're looking at the result of the computations in the computer. You're looking at the result of, hi Richard. You're looking at the result of the computer running a program and displaying a result for you to see. When you're thinking and you're experiencing your thoughts and you're experiencing your feelings, you're experiencing something that's already happened. So then the question becomes, how do you change what you think about using thinking? Because thinking is something that's occurring after the program has already run. So you're not changing the program. You're just thinking about it, which means programs are running and you're experiencing the after effect of it. So this is a very challenging situation because no one, well, I won't say no one, I know how to fix it. I didn't come up with this how to fix it myself, but I know it works. But the point is, most people don't know how to fix it, and it's like they're just listening to gurus or they're listening to people who also don't know how to fix it. Most people who are selling solutions, most people are just selling information that they've heard somewhere else or techniques they've heard somewhere else that they haven't really applied for themselves to do anything more. Like, it's like, imagine you have somebody like a Tony Robbins. I'm just going to use him as an example because everybody knows him. What if he's a person who's just accessed his ability to be a really great speaker and to believe in himself? He's just really good at that naturally, and he didn't have so much negative programming. But then he's teaching people all these techniques and things that he didn't actually do. Maybe some of them he did. But the point is, he's not actually telling people the truth about how to change, how to become more effective, because he probably doesn't know. But it serves his lifestyle. It serves him as an ego. And I've got nothing against Tony Robbins per se. I'm just using him as an example. Look at all the people out there writing books and selling things. But then look at the world. It's not changing. And I think that I know that the person who had the message that actually will change the world was Jesus. Whether he's a real person or not, I don't know. I don't know if his name was even Jesus. But he said, love your neighbor as yourself. Give as you want to receive. If we all did that, the world would be heaven on earth. That's why he said the kingdom of heaven is within us, because it's within you to trust yourself, to give another as you want to receive, and to trust the other person. But think of how difficult that is when you're born into a world where from day one you now have to learn to survive, because your physical basic needs, if you don't learn to get them yourselves, you don't get them. It's not a guaranteed right. So there are no human rights in this world. Children are not guaranteed an effective education. Because even if they have well-intentioned, well-meaning parents, the parents don't even know how to educate their children. They're just repeating what was happened to them. You know, I listen to parents talk about how loving they are with their children, but then, you know, I'll hear their child and they're like, stop, leave me alone, stop, I'm trying to talk on the phone. I'm like, you know, my wife, Katie, said something really profound to me once, because we were talking about our son, Max, who's 11 months old, and she said, you know, because I think she was realizing this point and sharing it with me, she's like, you know, Max doesn't know you. Like, he's getting to know you through how you interact with him. He's getting to know whether he likes you, whether he doesn't like you. And then I realized, like, wow, I never thought about it like that. Like, we take it for granted that as parents, we control and direct our children. But